degeneracy. So that is what will happen this week. Mainly will confine to 2D and then eventually will go to 3D. So let me start by covering very quickly what we discussed at the end of yesterday's lecture. So yesterday's lecture, probably this segment was the part which I didn't cover within the time. So the point of that we wanted to introduce a generic notation to deal with the scattering phenomena, and we realized that almost all the scattering phenomena is basically some wave is coming, some electron is incident. You are throwing an electron towards a potential, and then you are asking the question whether the what will happen to that electron. Now classically the answer is very simple. If your electrons energy, if your particles energy is higher than the potential, then the what particle will go through, like particle will not even see the potential. But if the energy is lower, then it will reflect back. There is no other choice. And we have seen in the quantum mechanical case, because it's a wave phenomena, all these possibilities exist, that the particle gets transmitted, some part of it gets reflected, and all this happens at the same time as in the spirit of quantum mechanics. And that is why you have to calculate all these probabilities and their amplitudes and all those things. So we came up with this generic framework to discuss this kind of problem. And the framework is basically that if I have I can divide the whole potential into 3 regions, and for most potential it will go to 0. So that is why I have drawn it like that. And you will find that we divide it into 3 regions, 1, 2 and 3. And if I throw the particle from this side, the incident beam will be this part. And if I throw, so I should need to increase the width. The incident beam will be of like this, and if I throw it from this side, the incident beam will be like this. So then B part will represent the reflected beam. If I throw from this side, F is the reflected beam, but if I throw from this side, F is the transmitted beam. It's the transmitted probability amplitude. So these are the only possibilities in the region 1 and 3 in this picture. In region 2, there are various possibilities. It could be exponential or it could be oscillatory, depending on whether the energy is greater than, as we have discussed earlier, whether the energy is greater than the potential or not. And that is why I am writing it as a generic F and G part. And one more thing we have to do, we have to stitch the potentials at this and this point. Like at the whatever the, sorry, the not the potential, the wave function, whatever the wave function is here, the wave function must be same at this point from both sides. So because we argued that the wave function at least must be continuous in order to be physical. Its derivative and its second derivative, all these things can have a jump, but the wave function itself has to be continuous. And then of course you also come up, then you make the point that whether the derivative is continuous or not, that depends on whether the potential is continuous or not. So based on that, you will have these 4 boundary conditions here and here, and these 4 boundary conditions will help you to eliminate like 2 of these unknown quantity, 4 of these unknown quantity, and express these things, this B and F, in terms of this G, because that is what we are interested in, is connect the reflected and transmitted in terms of the incident wave. And then when I do that, so notice that you will get this as linear equations. And the reason is that the conditions, because the Schrodinger equation is a linear differential equation, and it's a second order differential equation. So its boundary conditions are either a first order differential equation, which comes by matching the first order derivative of psi, or the psi itself, which is a 0th order. You can think it's a 0th order condition. So when you put the numbers in, you will get a linear equation from there. So that is the condition. You will get this linear. There is no square or any square or cube or anything. So that means you can write it down nicely as a matrix form. So this is this pair of linear equations, because B must somehow depend on A and G coming from these conditions. F must depend on A on G. So this linear condition can be generally written, most generic case it can be written like that, without knowing any further details about the problem. So this kind of relation between the objects, which is, so B and F in this case are the reflected and transmitted. A and G, I call them the incidents, which means the inbound and outbound, whatever is going out and whatever is going inwards to the potential. So they must be related like this, and this relation is called a S matrix. This is the S matrix formalism. And all the scattering problem you will learn in your entire life are usually describe either this S matrix, and then I'll tell you another thing is in T matrix. In terms of this T matrix and S matrix, for convenience, it's a compact notation to represent everything. And usually in a problem, you are asked to represent the problem in this form and compute this S matrix and T matrix elements, which is T matrix I'll tell in a moment. And that's a very simple thing to do because you have already learned how to express these B and A in terms of these expressions. For example, in these cases, you know the F and A, B and F relation. So from there, you know what are these matrix elements. So these guys will give you the relation between. So B, B is written here in terms of F, and F is written in terms of A. So you know how B is written in terms of A. So you get the S11 element from here. But in this problem, your G component is 0 because you said nothing is coming from the left side. So this S12 will be 0. So that way you know, that way you can figure out the matrix for any given problem. And once you know the matrix elements, it's very easy to calculate the reflection and transmission coefficients. So because reflection and transmission coefficients are nothing but the ratio of the ratio of the probability of the outbound wave to the inbound wave, and that is nothing but the square of the amplitude, so square of these elements of this matrix. So that is basically the whole story. And then so I want you to just look it up in the, it's a problem given as a problem in Griffith, and just look it up and write down the S matrix for delta function and square well. All the ingredients are already done, already there in the lecture and in the book. You just pick it up and put it there, and then you know the form of the S matrix. It's that simple. Now there is another important thing, that is this T matrix, and this T matrix is again a different way to express the same information. S matrix connects the incoming to the outgoing. T matrix connects whatever is the left to the whatever is the right. So T matrix is basically relation which tells you, so if you start from the left side, the conventionally you start from the left side and go to the right side, you want to express the relation between FG and AB. Earlier it was in and out, now it is FG and AB. So if you plug that, if you write this down, again this is a linear equation, this should be invertible. If you know the S, you can figure out the T and vice versa. But let's say you know you want to express this equation in this form, and in Griffith's notation I call it a call these elements as M. I should have called it T, but Griffith write it M, so I just took that. So this is the T matrix and this is the S matrix. Conventionally they are called transfer matrix or transmission matrix, and S is the scattering matrix. So now what is interesting, that you can now use this. So if you know what is the wave which is here, that this T matrix tells you what is the relation between the wave that is here to what is there. But then this one becomes the incident for the next wave. So this is basically the left part, and this is the right part, and this T matrix for this, so they call it M1 for this. So M1 connects this right part to the left part. Now for this one, this guy becomes the left part of this potential. So now the corresponding M matrix will connect this L to this R. So how do you relate this original? So let me call it L1 R1. So the L1 R1, the R1 becomes L2 for this one, and L2 R2. So how do you connect the R2 to L1? So if I push an electron inside some system which sees a series of, in a 1D system which sees a series of potentials of different form, how do I express what is coming out from the extreme other end? So this is basically what happens when you push an electron in a wire and it sees various kind of potential. How do you calculate the transmission probability or the deflection probability? Then what you can do is you can take this matrix. So then F and G becomes the incident of the next. So then you apply the element of the second M matrix. This is the M1, this is the M2, and then you get what is coming out from here. So it becomes, so now if you write it as directly, it becomes M2 times M1. So if you connect it with the first entry to the last entry. So that way, if you have these n matrices, like if you have an electron which is seeing like n number of potentials, so it will become a product of the M matrix of each of these potentials. So that is basically the problem. And that's a very simple and neat way to express, to know that what will happen when if you push a wave, a scattering wave through a series of potentials, and what comes out of the other end. Now this problem actually has a huge application. The entire, like, what you do in semiconductor physics, solid state physics, or even many other applications, you use basically this formalism to tell what is the transmission probability and reflection probability in a given situation. And and because of symmetries, you will again see symmetries. Usually if you have, let's say you are pushing a electron inside a 1D wire, and this 1D wire is transition symmetric, which means there is a periodic array of potentials which are looking identical. So these M matrices are basically identical. So if you can estimate there are n atoms, or n potential, or n ions, so then the electron will see n identical potentials. So this M matrix for that system will be just m to the power n, like there are n identical potential. And that will cause a huge simplification, because once you know the M matrix for one of this potential, now you must have learned how to take nth power of a potential of a matrix in mathematical method. So you just take the nth power of that, and then you know the whole problem, that what will happen from if you throw an electron from one side, or it will come out of the other side. If they are different, there is some asymmetry, then of course you have to do it individually. So that is the huge potential of this technique, and that technique is used in many wide class of problems. Okay, so now one more thing I want you to look at is, so basically this is a simple problem of a one application of this class of problem, and that is this ammonia molecule problem. So we have already discussed this ammonia molecule problem earlier, and also in the context of two-level system. So it turns out this ammonia molecule has these two states, and these two states are that this is the N atom, and this is the H, these are the H atoms. So they are oriented usually like that with respect to, and then it forms a dipole moment, because these N's are highly electronegative, and these H's are electropositive. So then this is like this forms a dipole moment, and when you put an electric field, then it aligns along this because of this dipole moment aligns along this electric field. Now there are two possible orientations. So one orientation is this, another orientation is this, two favorable orientation, where the N is downwards and H is like upwards. Now if you start with this potential in a given system, it's a huge energy cost to go to this potential, because you have to take the N through this and put it to the other side in order to get this from this. So now if you plot this situation, so these are these two stable configuration. One is this, let's say this is the up, and this is the down configuration, and there is a huge barrier in between.
Sir,
Yeah.
excuse me, sir. So one small question. Once we have the previous problem that you discussed, like one series of potential thingies. Yeah. So is there a fine probability that the particle will be like trapped within
Very good question.
two
Yes,
potentials?
there
Because
is.
I was trying to solve it, but I don't know what are the conditions such that
No. It's a very good question, and there is a huge physics behind it. There was a 1970 Nobel Prize on this. So this phenomena is called Anderson localization, and in a simple system, in a symmetric system, there is no probability that the particle will be trapped. Okay, but you can show that if you have a series of potentials, and it is a one-dimensional system, then there is a non-zero. There is a probability 1 that the particle will be trapped. Okay? This is a scattering phenomena. But you said you are trying to do it and you landed on that. Is that
no?
okay?
Yes. So
Because
I was
unlikely that in a simple problem that will happen. But
I
what
was
problem
what I
was
was
it?
trying to do is like not this much. It's like I was trying to have multiple barriers, okay,
Hmm.
equidistant to each other, okay, not one,
But
like
the
multiple
barriers are
barriers,
identical or different?
identical. All of them
Okay,
were
then it will
identical.
not trap.
Yeah,
Then it
yeah.
will not
That,
trap.
but then I was thinking that okay, there can be a case where it could be trapped in between, but I
Yes.
don't know like what are the conditions needed. So is
Yeah.
it
So
like externally controlled or a property of
you need an
stability of
asymmetry. You
wafers?
basically need an asymmetry, and not just it will not happen. I don't think it will happen for two potentials. You need okay. You can check that, but I cannot intuitively think. No, it will not happen for two potential. You need a 1D system like this. Like
Like yeah, we will have multiple, yeah, these kind of things.
actually you need a randomness into it. Okay, you need a random number to generate this kind of potential. It's called
Okay.
it's a so it's a extremely profound thing. Like it is so cool that I can give a 2-hour lecture on that. So it should be that kind of deep topic. But let
Okay.
me tell you what cool thing happens here, because you said that it's a huge subject. So if you put an electron like this, you can show that with probability 1, it will be trapped here. It won't be able
With
to go down.
probability one.
Yes, probability 1, even
Okay.
for a well, even for
Okay.
an infinitesimal amount of disorder. That is the point. Even for an
Okay.
infinitesimal amount of disorder, it will be trapped like that. Now it's a very non-trivial statement, but it is not hard to understand, because it says that if the electron is passing through that, if there is some disturbance somewhere, then the electron has to face it. There is no way to avoid it, right? But then the next point is, what happens if you make the system 2D? Then you will expect that if I have a 2D system, if I put some potential here and here and here, then the electron might always find a way to go around, right? Electron might always, because electrons are wave like, remember, so they might find a way to move around. But it turns out, and this is an extremely non-trivial result, even in 2D, it's probability 1 that the electron will be stuck, will be
Okay.
trapped inside. So this
I
phenomenon.
I thought that it would be like some, yeah, finite, but yeah, like the probability will be something finite, lesser than one, because the thing is that even the transmission and, yeah, transmission and reflected probability, like that part is not even one. Like
No, no,
yeah, like
it will not happen for a very simple-minded potential, what you are
yeah,
thinking.
yeah, okay, okay, okay,
But what
okay.
I'm telling you is something very profound. I mean, because you are heading in that direction, so I'm telling you that. But I mean, you can read about it, but don't go too much about it. And the 2D result is
Okay,
highly
sir.
non-trivial. It's extremely non-trivial result. And in 3D again, you will see. Then in 3D, it can pass through actually. In 3D, it can go from one side to other side, and but unless you make the potential extremely random. So what you do is basically put some random potential. So unless you make it very random, then it will be able to go through one side to other side. But if it is very random, like, then it can get stuck. But this implies a lot of things. It means in true 1D, it is impossible to have a metal. Why? Because whatever system you make, there will be some disturbance, some noise, right? Some potential disturbance will be there. So it tells you there is no true metal in 1D and 2D. And metal means in a system where a electron goes through one end to another end without much trouble. An insulator means where a electron cannot go, right?
Okay, okay.
So then it tells you then there is no true metal in 1D and 2D. But then it doesn't mean a very weird thing, for the reason because there is no true 1D and 2D system. But only very recently people have started making those truly 1D and 2D system, and there are some like close enough 1D and 2D system, and then you will see that there is a very rich physics in that. I mean, it's a very favorite topic of mine, and I'll talk about it later. And this guy got a Nobel Prize for that around 1970 or something. He was actually trying to solve a different problem, but while trying to do that, he landed on this. And then very lately in 2006 or something, people tried to solve it for interacting case, and that led to a very big subject called many body localization and all that. So we should because you landed on that, we can talk about this. And this is so simple Anderson localization, not this, is actually a wave phenomena. And it is not necessarily you can see it even for classical waves. Like if you do it for a classical wave in a people even see that for ocean wave and all those things, that if you have a wave with various some random barrier and things like that, the waves can get stuck. Like by that I mean the the wave pattern cannot proliferate beyond a finite region. So that is the phenomena. But for that you need some randomness. In a simple minded potential you won't see that. But very good that you asked this question, and we will talk about this later. Okay.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
like you said, it applies to classical case as well. But
Hmm.
in that case, does it not depend on the initial energy or the amplitude, such that the barriers you are putting?
Yeah, so
Um,
yeah, I get it what you are saying. So in classical wave you don't talk about it like that. You don't talk about like you are throwing a potential in this side or something like that. Your source is at the middle, right? Your source is at the middle, and then you are asking the question, can this wave be something which is confined in a finite space and doesn't go outside? Okay. And then you can show that because of randomness, not because of high energy barrier. Of course there is one point that you are saying, that if the energy is high enough and the initial wave amplitude is not that high, then it will be stuck anyway. Then what is the big deal? But it turns out that even if it is not high enough, just because of randomness it can get stuck.
okay, so just one
Okay.
more question. If you have a series of such barriers in which an
Hmm.
electron is stuck, is it possible to predict the exact location where it will be stuck
No,
when you
you
just look
can
at
you
the
can say
problem?
the probability, right? But once you measure, then you will find somewhere.
No,
So that is
like
the whole
no,
point.
that is clear that it will get stuck with a probability one.
Uh,
Can we find probabilities to be stuck at a particular location, say A to B? This will be probability to get stuck. Overall, it's one that will get stuck in this
yeah,
whole
yeah,
series
yeah.
of
You
barriers.
can say some finite region where it has some 99%, 98% probability, that sort of thing. So or even 100% actually, yes. So you can say that this finite region it will be stuck. It won't go anywhere else beside that. So that is the statement. But now I regret a bit saying all that. So this is a very cool problem, and I just got carried away. So don't like get too much into this right now, because this problem has various things. This is a very rich problem and very diverse problem. But just know that, I mean, you can get into this, but outside this class, not within this class. It will completely derail the class. And as I said, this is such a favorite topic of mine that I can keep talking about it for hours. So I need to control it here. And just to answer that question, is there a possibility that the electron getting trapped in a region? The answer is yes, it can get trapped in a region in a single particle quantum mechanics problem. And then it has a very profound implication it in a very modern application context, because it tells you, if you can lock a system at a corner of a Hilbert space, at a finite region of a Hilbert space, that has a very serious application. Because then you can, it is not easy to guarantee that if you prepare a state, that state will remain in a finite region of a Hilbert space, it will not spread around everywhere. If you can guarantee that much, that has a huge application, because then you can do various things with that state. You won't lose information about that state, and that whole statement is like it's a very important subject on its own.
So that's the bigger class of problems
That's a bigger class of problem. This is the
which
ambient problem.
includes this one, right?
Yeah, this is a thing which started from 2006. People have started seriously making progress on this, and now it's a very profound subject. And it is related to some very fundamental postulates of StatMech and all that. Yeah, let me not get into that. I mean, it will completely derail the class. But to answer your question, can it get trapped? Yes, there are possibilities in which it get trapped, and this is a wave phenomena. And this, for that you need some randomness. By randomness, I mean you have to draw these potential heights and barrier depths from some random distribution. So that is the point. Okay, so now let's talk about this double well potential. And this double well potential, as I said, this is the form of the potential which is coming from this ammonia molecule business. But it need not be like let's say I just start with this potential wherever it comes from, and then I want to make a crude approximation. This potential, of course, is not oscillator. It is some function which is like this, and it doesn't have a nice behaving form. So to make a very crude assumption, I call it a I call it a square well barrier problem. So it's a drastic assumption, but this assumption gives you some qualitative aspect of this problem. So now so what I want you to think a little bit is guess the wave function for this. So what you can do, you can see that what you can guarantee that the wave function must go to 0 here, because this is an infinite well. So this is because this one goes to infinity. I am approximating this wall as an infinite wall. This wall also has an infinite wall, but this is a finite barrier in the middle. So then what you expect, the wave function vanish here, the wave function vanish here. So and you are looking at the ground state, right? So the ground state means there will be no nodes. And at the 0th approximation, let's say you shrink this barrier to very small. So if it is very small, it will be like infinite, it will be 0 here, and then it will come back. And if this would have been a this would have been shrink to 0, like shrink to a very small width. So then it will be also 0 here, and I increase the height here also. So it is just like two wells, two separate wells, two infinite well placed side by side. So then it will be like something like this, right? So now if I make this width bigger, then I can guess that this region, the form might be exponential, because the energy is lower than this barrier. So then in order to stitch these two solution, this is sinusoidal form, this is a sinusoidal form, and they are stitched like an exponential. So now you can go to the actual solution, you can work out so here I'm guessing the solution without doing any calculation. Now let's say I want to guess the solution for the next energy level. So if I want to guess the solution for next energy level, what will happen? So if I remove this, for the next energy level, what I will expect, that there must be a node at the center, because the next E2 by node theorem must have a node. So that means that it cannot be like this. So the wave function must be like this, must be of this form. But then in the middle you have made the width finite, so it must teach somewhere. So then it must be exponential in this bit in between. So then you can again guess the solution of this form. But to work out this precise form, you have to work out this cos hyperbolic and sine hyperbolic. So that's what I'm telling you, that using some pure guesswork, you can qualitatively draw the wave function for any arbitrary barrier problem and all that. And then you gradually make the problem what you want to make it like. Like then you make it like make it infinite and make it round and all those things. And then the wave function will keep changing, but these qualitative characters will remain. There will be a node, there will be exponential part, there will be a sinusoidal part. Those factors will remain there, but then some other features will change. So that is a very intuitive way to solve this kind of problems. And then this problem is actually again doing this limiting check. You can do this limit check to make it like two separate infinite wells, or make it if you whatever solution you get now, if you shrink it to here, then you will get one well of double width. So that you can also check whether you are getting those limiting answers to be correct. So this whole thing is a very this is a historic problem, because this was solved around around 1950s or something, to design the first atomic clock. So as I was telling you at some point of time, that now this standard measurement of time is through some atomic clock, which is basically a frequency of oscillation of a state between these two, frequency of oscillation of a cesium atom between its states. So the first, it was done historically in 1950s or something for ammonia. And I mean, people noticed this for ammonia, they didn't standardize it. So it turns out that if you bombard this system with an energy of delta E, which is something around this micro electron volt. Now why you choose this particular energy? Because that time around this World War and all, people developed this microwave laser. So they are called masers. So that had this particular energy. So that was easily available, commercially available. So people tried to do experiments on this, and it turns out this is a very special energy, because these energy scales, these first two levels have energy of this kind of delta E, this kind of energy. So that means if you bombard it with that kind of a source of laser, that means that energy of photon, then only these two states gets involved. But if you want to get involved to other states and all that, so then it turns out that those energies are much higher, like milli electron volt. Normally the energy levels are much higher. So you had a very special case where you, even though it's an infinite level system, it effectively becomes a two level problem because of the energy scales involved. So you only a two level oscillation it can happen. So the system, if you now calculate its uh, excited, what are the states of this system? This can be like psi1 plus psi2 by root 2 and psi1 minus psi2 by root 2, and if you calculate its time dependent wave function, the full wave function, then it comes of this form. So the system oscillates between these two states, and this kind of oscillation we already discussed when we talked about two-level system. So it's effectively two-level system, and this oscillation period is like that. So it is basically, it's like a oscillating dipole antenna. So it just oscillate between these only these two levels, only these two possible states. When you excite it to the level of this two lowest energy, and then it emits energy at around this of this frequency and energy scale. And that was the first detection people used. Now there are a lot of details involved in that which I'm skipping, and in order to understand those details we have to learn a little bit about this, how these lasers work. Because what happens, so the system is absorbing some photon, then it is getting excited, and then it is emitting another photon which is of the same energy scale, and then this emitted photon is again getting fed into that. So this is some feedback system, and that way the amplitude of this photon gets amplified. So that is basically the whole idea of stimulated emission and amplification of light. And then it is that is what it gives rise to this very high intensity source of single frequency light. And there are various aspects of this, but roughly the problem is, I'm just telling you the background story to draw your interest. But the main point is, it's a infinite level problem, but because the energy scale associated becomes effectively two level problem. And then you can apply all the things you learned for two level quantum mechanics, and then you can work out the frequency of oscillation, and that basically is a internal clock of this system. It's the internal scale of this system, and that depends all the energy levels and all these factors. And then one can, if you are using ammonia or whatever cesium atom or whatever system you are using, then for that particular system these numbers are locked and fixed. So that can be used as a standardized system. It is like saying that the earth sun system has a standard frequency, at standard frequency of rotation and all that. Similarly, but that has of course a lot of other factors, and it's not a very good constant and on that. But this turns out to be a much better constant, and that is why people use this kind of thing as a standardization of clock. So that was the point I wanted to say. There's some lot of noise is coming from somewhere. Anyways, so that is the story of this part. And now I'll move on to talk about the two-dimensional systems. So what I'll do, I will stop sharing this and open a second file. Okay, so I hope so far it is fine, because I just finished what I wanted to finish last time and added a little bit of things to tell you what are the significance of these kind of problems and how they are connected to these problems to some other problems you have studied earlier. So now what I'll do, I will now solve this exact same type of problems in a higher dimension. So let's start with the 2D system. So for higher dimension, first of all, notice what will be the Schrodinger equation. And this is again something we already discussed in the context of.
Sir, I think we can't see the presentation.
Oh, I didn't share the screen probably. Oh. So this time I want to show you some plots. Can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we will talk about a higher dimensional problem. And the Schrodinger equation, the stationary Schrodinger equation for the higher dimensional problem will be this. I think I should increase the width. Will be this, and then if you don't remember that, just go back to this lecture 11 and see how did I work out this generic stationary equation. You might think that, oh, just because the one dimension is psi x vx psi x, how do I know that this one will be psi r vr psi r? So r means just a function of x, y, and z, or whatever dimension it is. So just go back to lecture 11 and see that there we did it for a generic case. So now I want to write it specifically for a 2D system. So this psi is now a function of x and y, and this is the Laplacian. So the Laplacian is del 2 del x2 del 2 del y2, and this v is a 2D function, so it's a vxy psi xy, and this side is again e times psi xy. So I miss the psi. So this is basically my 2D Schrodinger equation. So how will I solve it? You already know that how to solve this kind of partial differential equations with two variables. So you learned this, right? Partial differential equation is two variable. The techniques of separation of variables.
Separation of variables.
Hmm?
Yeah. We have done that in like multiple cases, like
Okay.
deriving the
Oh.
time independent from the entire Schrodinger equation and all those kind of things.
Oh yeah, that we
A
you already.
Laplacian and all.
Yeah. So here we will basically use this idea, and we will. And there is one more mathematical background check I want to do. Have you learned any group theory? Any element of group theory?
Yes, sir. We had a course that had group theory as a subset of it, but the portions are not completed because of the classes being shifted to online, and a lot of the portions was left over. Like halfway through or something, we had to leave the subject because the professor was not able to finish the portions within the time of the semester.
Oh, I see. And what did you learn there, basically? So you learn definition of a
It was,
group and all things like elementary things,
yeah.
character tables
Yeah,
and all that.
Sorry?
Character tables.
Yeah, we did that as well.
You did that,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, we did that, but like it was just
Okay,
the
very good. So
definition
did you
part.
learn anything about Lie groups?
That no, we did not.
No, not that far.
No,
Okay,
sir, we did
so
only discrete parts, not the continuous.
okay, I'm getting a little ambitious now. Okay,
So we did
so
a little bit of symmetry groups and that's it. Not
oh, you
anything.
did some symmetry groups. Okay,
Just a little bit.
okay. Let me get a little more ambitious. Did you do anything about representation theory?
No, sir.
No,
Not at all.
not that far.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not this, sir.
So all these things are actually very handy. Like, so I will do it in a very intuitive manner, and probably we will see. Maybe you will do some of it in the mathematical physics course, right?
Yeah, so we hope to do that because like Arunima ma'am told that since this group theory has the like least number of application as compared to the other parts, and since it's a hard
No.
bit, so we'll
No,
have
we-
it at
And
the
if the
end.
courses at
The
this
group
level of
Because we have like other things like Fourier translation
So the
and
yeah,
series. That's
so
why those are
group
like pushed
theory
forward.
can actually, if you use group theory, you can solve a 50% of a quantum mechanics problem, and even classical mechanics problem. It is like so cool, and it is so important, and it is basically a way to exploit symmetries. And when you learn symmetry, it will turn out to be extremely powerful tool. But it is usually also true that group theory is not taught, uh, like it is not a very this problem is always there. It's a historic problem of a physics curriculum, that people somehow learn the group theory in a very informal way, which is okay. So that's how I learned it, and I didn't learn it very formally. So what we will do, that we will use the ideas of group theory in informal way, and we'll build up the symmetry and all those things. But maybe in the winter break or something, you read about, those who are of you who are interested, read about it carefully, and next semester I will use it, maybe the more powerful aspects of the group theory. for the problems. So then we can probably at least see some how powerful this idea is and how much it can help to solve a problem. Anyways, so let's and there is another thing which I believe you also know, that if I give you a differential equation in some xy coordinate, can you transfer it into a polar coordinate or cylindrical coordinate or any other coordinate?
Yes, so we did that.
Yeah.
Like
So
in
okay,
one
very
did
good.
that.
So then a lot of my work, at least in the this front, is same. And also, do you also realize these points, that if I give you a problem and it has some symmetry, it is useful to express it in a certain coordinate, and then it becomes simpler. The problem becomes simpler if you express it into certain coordinate. For example, if the problem has a cylindrical symmetry, it is better to express it in cylindrical coordinate. If it has spherical symmetry, it is better to express in a spherical coordinate, that sort of thing. For example, if I give you a potential which is like if I give you a squared well, for example, a squared well in 2D. So 2D means it is some square, yeah, it is like that, some square where it is infinite here, infinite here, infinite here, and infinite here. Then this problem doesn't have a then it is best to express it at xy coordinate. But if the potential is something like this, so this is not a quantum mechanics specific thing, it is probably you have encountered this in electrodynamics a lot. So if I have a potential which is Laplace equation, a potential like this, then it has a spherical symmetry or circular symmetry. So then it is better to express it into a polar coordinate. So you realize these sort of things, right? If I give you a problem, you can stare at the problem and know which coordinate is the best, that sort of thing. Simple coordinates, I'm not talking about hyperbolic coordinate or some weird thing. So are you familiar with this kind of things?
Yes.
We did similar things in electrodynamics.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. So then you have a lot of mathematical background already. Okay, so we will exploit that a lot. So here, so let's start with the simplest problem, which is this infinite well problem. And this infinite well problem has this thing that instead of this, now I make it a square well, which means it's a 2D system, which you can again think a particle is coming from here and it sees some square region, square or rectangular region of dimension Lx and Ly, but the potential is 0 inside and infinite at the boundary. So how will you solve that problem? So again, you write down this as a equation for this middle region. So this is the equation for that. And then you use the separation of variable, because you can see these are clearly, it is like two separate equations. So I can think it as like del x square phi ex phi and some del x square psi ex psi. So where the psi is basically a product of phi and chi. So I can write this in as a two clearly separate equations, and then I can solve them independently. But notice that you can do that only because this vxy is a separable potential. So if it turns out, if you have a problem in which you cannot separate it, then you cannot do this kind of thing. But in this case, it's a very simple potential. I will give you some example where you cannot do it, but right now this equation clearly tells you that you can separate it into like two separate equations. So these separate equations, each of these has the exactly same solution. Like they are like two different 1D problems. So they will have these two solutions, phi and chi, which is sine and cosine. The boundary condition again tell you the cosine part is 0. So now you are left with the sine part, and the sine part is basically this. So now you can normalize this, and again the boundary tells you that this psi is 0 entirely along this line and 0 entirely along this line. So this tells you, so this entire line is 0 and this entire line is 0, and that will give you these two quantization conditions, and this quantization condition gives you these two energies, Ex and Ey, which is nx square pi square h bar square by 2ml square, ny square pi square h bar square by 2ml square. As I said, that you can also physically guess this answer, because you converted this problem as if it is like two independent 1D problems. But now you have to bring them together, bring them back together, and then you have to write it like E nx ny, and because you already established that this problem is like sum of these two problems, so the total energy is the sum of these two. which is nx square by ls square plus ny square by li square. And this wave function is basically a product of these two functions with this normalization constant. So that is basically the whole solution of this problem by using separation of variable method. Now the thing to notice here is this special case. So what I'll do, I'll talk about this symmetry here. For today's lecture, that is all I'll talk about, and tomorrow I'll build up more formally on this. And then I missed some part, some small things from the previous lectures leftover part, so which I will also tell you. So basically this is some problem I want you to try. I will give it those problems as formal assignment, but I want to just give you a lead on that. Okay, so now in the leftover 10 minutes, that's what we'll do. So now we have this energy, the full solution, and now let's make the problem a little more symmetric. By symmetric I means let's make this Lx and Ly to be equal. Let's say I make it 1, or like something equal, some L. So it's a squared well. Instead of a rectangular well, it's a squared well. So now I can list the energies, and I will notice something called a degeneracy, which you again might have seen it in some other form in various other contexts. But here by degeneracy I mean there are two separate wave function or two separate energy levels which have exactly same energy. So if I put the ground state is nx equal to 1, ny equal to 1, the lowest possible energy, I get the E to be pi h bar square by ml square, and this has only one way to do it. Now there is another way to do it. If I write it as 2 1 or 1 2, so nx2 ny1 nx1 ny2, then there are two ways to do it, but it has exactly same energy. So if I write it here, so if I plot energy on this y-axis and x-axis to be some states, actually x-axis doesn't have much meaning, it is just some number. And so if I plot these energies, so I will see, I call it 2e, let's say, where the E is basically 2 times. So this guy I call it 2, so that's why I write it as 2e. So now this one will have an energy 5 by 2, and there are two states at that energy. Then again 2 2 will have only one choice. There is no other possibility. That is 80. And then 1 3 will again have two choice. So that way you will, if you plot this energy level, you will see 1 2 1 2, this kind of degeneracy. So there will be some degeneracy 1 state, some degeneracy 2 states, and at a much higher level you will see some non-trivial cases which will have degeneracy 3 and 4. So this is an example of degeneracy 4. So this is 1 8 8 1 4 7 7 4. These 4 combinations have degeneracy 1. So these are, you can see there are two types of degeneracy. So I have not brought the word symmetry, but you will see that these degeneracies are coming because of some symmetries of the problem. But some of them are little different from that. So you can see there are two types of degeneracy. One is by simply exchanging nx and ny. So nx2 ny1 nx1 ny2. So this simple exchange will give a type of degeneracy. But which is a more easy and simple to see type of degeneracy. But then there is another type of degeneracy which are very non-trivial, where you are saying you are adding square of two numbers, and the square of two numbers, the sum of square of two numbers can be same in two different set of numbers. So these are actually a very profound things in mathematics. So in number theory, so people often do this kind of problems, and there is actually a little story behind it, which I am tempted to say this story at this level. So if you know this, I don't know if you have heard this story. Do you know about this Hardy and Ramanujan's taxi story? Any of you know that?
Like, it's a famous story, sir.
Yeah, it's a famous story. So the story was, of course you know it then, maybe all of you don't know. So the story was that Ramanujan was very sick at the hospital when he was in UK. And Hardy came to see him and said that I came in a taxi whose number was 1729. And that number is very boring, like it has no feature. And Ramanujan immediately said that it's a smallest possible number whose sum can be of which is a sum of two cubes of two different numbers in two different ways. Now this is a very why it is such a like unbelievably genius statement, because of course someone who is a very good mathematician or someone like that, maybe Shakuntala Devi kind of mathematician, they can immediately say that if you give them a number, they can tell you that it can be sum of two cubes in multiple ways. So that is one level of genius. But this guy in an instantly figured out this is the smallest number. So his brain can scan the whole space of numbers somehow and then say this is the smallest number where this can happen. So that was the remarkable genius behind this story. And now you can go, now what this statement is telling you, so now you want to find all the numbers or the smallest numbers, let's say, which can be expressed as square of two numbers in two different or multiple ways, at least multiple ways. So that tells you that how you can search the space of this kind of degeneracies, which are not of this type, not simple exchange type, this non-trivial type. And these things are very profoundly related to something called accidental degeneracies. Why is that? Because this first type of degeneracy, you can relate it very easily by saying, oh, this is if it is a square, it must have a structure of a pi by 2 rotation, right? If you rotate this guy pi by 2, you will get the same object. So if you rotate this guy pi by 2, there is no change. And this 1 and 2 exchange. So what is this 1-1 state? If you plot this 1-1 state, it looks like this. So let me actually show you some plots. Okay. Unfortunately, the time is almost up and I landed on a super interesting thing. Maybe I'll take it to tomorrow. Can you see my entire screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what I'll do, so I'll plot some of these wave functions. So let me plot the simplest wave function. Okay, let me plot the simplest wave function. So so let me say that my L is a 4. So L is 4 here. So that's why I'm writing. So this is pi x. What is that? N pi x by L. Okay. So this is the 1-1. So let me plot the 1-1. So this is pi. This is x. This is divided by L. So I will get this, right? This is a peak at the. So this wave, this mesh is the wave function, and this is a contour plot of that. So are you familiar with this kind of plots? Do you know
Like-
what this
Like
plot?
individually, people might know this, but like we didn't
Okay.
do it in a course.
Okay.
But
so-
individual people might know this.
Okay, so let me tell you quickly what this plot means. So I will not get time to finish this discussion. So I want you to play with this thing a little bit. And tomorrow I'll take it over from here. So this top plot, this mesh plot is basically the wave function, which is, as I said, this is sine n pi x by L times sine n pi x by L. So at n, I am taking 1 and 1. And this bottom plot is a projection of that on 2D. And this color code is basically the magnitude. So this is the highest magnitude. So this is the bright color. So it has this color code that 1 is yellow and 0 is black. So this intermediate color, this heat map, it basically tells you what is the color. And this gives you the contours, which means lines of constant, and they are squarish because it's a square symmetric potential. So now if I plot the second one, the second one is 1, 2, right? So this is, you can see my terminal, right? This small screen.
Yeah, we can see it. So
Yeah. So this is 1 times 1 and 2. So 1 and 2 will look like this. So it will have a flipped thing. So there it is -1. So -1 is the dark one, and this is the bright one. So this is the +1. So this heat map will look like this. Now if I do 2, 1, what do
so
you expect?
heat map is the probability, right? Like
No,
the
heat map is
yellowish part is showing 1. The most
No,
yellow
heat
part.
map is not probability. The heat map is if I would have plotted probability, then this would have been both up. There is no negative
Yeah.
part,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And
So
this is
it's
up. So this is +1. This is +1. This is down. This is -1.
okay.
okay.
So
So this is
so
like
this
that.
is basically the wave function.
This wave function, yeah, not probability.
Okay,
So
okay, sir.
now can you guess what will happen if I plot the 2 1?
It will flip, like
Yeah,
it will have a
it will
similar,
rotate
but it
90
will,
degrees because
yeah,
as I said,
but
it's
it
a
will have
90
a
degree rotation.
symmetry. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the right one will
So
become,
this will
yeah.
rotate 90 degree, right? That okay. So I want you to play with these plots a little bit using whatever software you have, whatever is your favorite software. So play with it a little bit, and then we'll take it over from here tomorrow. And today, that's all. That's all about the lecture. And I want you to give a little head start on some problems I want you to try, because I already mentioned that how do you guess the solution of this double well potential. So now try some weird variants. So let's say somebody was asking why did I give half harmonic oscillator, but of course why half? Like make it even more complicated. So if I have a harmonic oscillator, I put up a finite wall at the middle. What will happen? Can you guess the solution without solving? And then, as I said, like try some variants of these problems and try to guess the solution without solving, and you know enough to do that. So spend some time on it. I'll give some assignment based on that. And this is a very useful thing to develop, a very useful skill to develop, where you can guess a solution, and even I can give you an arbitrary potential. Guess the solution, the third excited state, what that will be. Can you guess that? Actually you can without knowing anything. At least qualitatively you can. So practice this kind of thing a little bit, think about little bit, and then we can discuss more about it later. Okay, that's all.
Yes, sir. Sir, and one small thing regarding the academics, I was asking, like many professors are saying that they will chop off some of the portions of the syllabus because the time is less,
Yeah, I already
because of
did.
the TC, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
because of the
I have
TCS
practiced.
structures. Could you just tell exactly, like, yeah, what are we going to make?
Yeah,
Yeah, like,
I wrote it already in Piazza.
oh,
There is a post in Piazza where I marked in yellow or some color.
that is, but the thing is that will you follow that? Because that was a, like,
The
kind of
vi-
like
okay.
in
So
between mid sem.
am I going to chop up more? That is the question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
possible
yeah.
actually. So I have to think a bit, and I can do that.
Because you gave that, as far as I remember, in the middle of the exam or somewhere like that, not
Yeah,
at
yeah,
the
yeah.
end of the mid
So
sem.
there are two things happened here. Right? Okay, one was my fault, which means I completely forgot that there is a mid-sem break. Last semester there was no mid-sem break. So you thought there is no mid-sem break, and this semester there was a mid-sem. I ignored that.
Mid-sem break was there in the academic calendar from the starting, sir.
I know, but I didn't notice that. It's my fault.
Oh, okay, 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 okay,
I'm
okay.
confessing it's my fault
Okay.
because I joined only in previous semester. I saw there is no mid-sem break, so I assumed there will be no mid-sem break here. It was my fault, and that's how I lost 1 week, and then I lost another week, but that is partially recovered. Okay, and then of course I'm running slow. So these three factors will cut off some syllabus. So I will make that very specific. Okay, so most likely the many body and entanglement will be dropped off. So these two things will be definitely dropped off, and there will be some small topics will be dropped off here and there. So
Okay.
yeah.
So,
So
so I'm just saying that, yeah, whenever you get a free time or something like that, could you just, yeah, like dot down each and like major topics we are going to do, so so that it is helpful for us also. Like just make some amendments or addition or subtraction in the, yeah, what you say, in
yeah,
the
yeah, that
Piazza post
yeah,
only,
I will just mark
as
in some
soon as
color
possible.
the part I'm
Yeah,
dropping.
yeah, as soon as possible, because that will
Yeah.
be really helpful for us, sir.
Okay, I'll do that.
Because you said that you have to correct the paper and you are under time
Yeah,
shortage. That's
now
why, like,
I'm under
yeah,
too
yeah,
much pressure. And
yeah, yeah.
also, I want you to do this thing which lost in halfway, and I'm again very time pressed for that. I mean, divide the responsibility among yourself. Like write this summary of lecture thing, which was very useful. It was like as I wrote that there was a list of topics which was covered, and there were some issues which came in the class. So some uncomfortable part and all that, and that segment was I think very useful. And again it is a little and if you divide this responsibility, you can write it down. I will review it of course before you put it up, but just keep that pushing. Don't let that go away. Yeah, so that will automatically serve as a record. Okay,
Okay.
so I'm closing the recording and